The winter 2009 ASUCD elections has turned into one of the most historical elections in ASUCD history. With 16 candidates running for 6 Senate seats and 2 highly qualified executive ticket candidates, it resulted in the second highest voter turnout in UC Davis history.
We'll start off with number 1.
The winter 2009 elections have come to an end, and with over 6,000 students voting, it was the second largest election in UC Davis history.
Okay, so what we did differently was we had Ag TV commercials, we contacted KDVS, we had Unitrans help us, we had the California co-host our debates. We just tried to use every option we had of ASUCD, and we wanted interdepartmental collaboration.
Only 13 votes separated the 2 tickets. And it was 200.
So on Friday, the day of the results, 2 hours after the scheduled time for announcement, the Senate seats were first announced, ending the candidacy for 12 candidates and declaring victory to the 6 newly elected senators. The elections begin like any other, with all the candidates campaigning and making an effort to have their platforms heard. It was during the president and senator debates that the complaints began to arise. The lead slate was criticized for having supporters that only cheered for their candidates, which for many was a distraction. However, there were senators that found no problem in having party supporters.
We worked hard. I think that we were coming in as the underdogs, and that was something that really helped us. I think they were a little arrogant, and we worked hard and pulled through. One of the things that I think worked really well was doing classroom speeches. I think that people were really happy about that.
I mean, it was so competitive. I mean, you heard it right there, like highest voter turnout we ever had. I felt it. I mean, it was incredible. I'm really happy I did this. Like, absolutely.
I think all the candidates did their part to make it a really competitive election and highest voter turnout ever.
Currently, the election results have been challenged, but in order to understand the scandal, let's start from the beginning.
All right. So we clearly had a statement saying that the caste system is down. Please return back to 11:30 to vote. So if people read that, then they would know. If they didn't read that,
all of a sudden we're getting a new server. Why are we getting a new server now? Why do we use a new server this time? Why? What was wrong with the old server? And then there's a glitch in it in the middle of the day. You can see the numbers of how many people are voting and who's in the lead. How did that start? When did that start?
After 2 weeks of campaigning, it was time for students to vote. But it was during the second night of elections that problems began to arise. Results were leaked, and the system came crashing down for 3 full hours.
Also, there was some controversy in the last couple of days, and there was a huge last-minute push for both of these tickets. And I mean, I really respect the efforts of both, and clearly both were obviously qualified. But yeah, I think controversy was one of the big things in the last couple hours that brought
it was when Joe Chatham and Chris Dietrich were announced as the new ASUCD president and vice president that brought mixed feelings to the students' minds, ultimately making students question the voting problems and creating this idea of conspiracy in the voters' minds.
Then somebody hacked into the system. Then election site was down during the most prime hours of voting on a Thursday. Really? Oh, okay. And then the person that's working with them is a supporter of theirs? Oh, okay.
right? So we clearly had a statement saying that the caste system is down. Please return back to 11:30 to vote. So if people read that, then they would know. If they didn't read that,
I think the push in the end had a lot to do with the leak, because without the leak, I think there was a very divergent opinion as to who was in the lead. I had heard from a lot of lead supporters that they believed their candidate had no problem. And I had also heard from Joe Chris supporters, of which I was.
However, technical support and elections committee chair confirmed that even though the system ran problems, elections were extended to make up for the time lost, and that in no way affected the results.
And at the end of the day, Lula's still my president. So whenever I want something done, I'm going to go to Lula. That's what I know.
But despite the technical difficulties, the elections were extended to 10:30 a.m. of the final day in order to fulfill the 48-hour opportunity to vote timeline set by the elections committee. Technical support claims that this had no impact on election results. Students continued to demand for a re-election, and this was later solidified when an official request for a re-election was filed.
For over 2.5 hours. And so students could not vote. And I know many of my friends tried voting multiple times during that time and they could not vote. And so And although I'm not pointing any fingers, but I know that the elections committee tried their hardest to compensate for this by extending the time the next day from 8 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And it was instructed that the registrar sent out an email to all the students to let them know that this extension has been made. However, this email was not sent out, and unless students were in the know, you had a friend who was running, you were told by email, Facebook, message, phone call, however that message was relayed to you, that was the only way that you knew about the fact that the extension was actually created. And I feel that many students were disenfranchised. Many of my own friends who wanted to vote could not vote. And I specifically think this is unfair because, especially with the executive ticket, it was a difference between 13 votes.
We're really talking about a fair election. It means not breaking bylaws. It means that no one should have known about the results beforehand. And because someone did know about the results, because it was leaked into the entire Davis community, that means it was not fair. Regardless of if everyone knew about it, no one should have known who was winning or who was losing. Because it was an unfair election, elections committee should have took the right procedure instead of extending the hours in the morning when the computers were shut down in the evening, which is more when students are out and about, instead of the morning when students are not even relevant, they know nothing, and they're not going to check their email. They're not going to get up at like 8 in the morning and be like, oh, there's an extension. That means it's still not fair. So the proper thing to do is to have a re-election, in my opinion.
Who was running, all of their constituents were equally affected. I don't think you can argue, we don't have the data to support any argument that one group was more affected by the glitch than any other. Everyone was running. The voting site was open to everyone at all times. And I really believe that though it was unfortunate, and yes, the elections committee did the best they could, and that may not have been ideal, this was not an ideal situation.
I would encourage you guys to withdraw this because I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, because less students are going to vote if we have a re-election. I guarantee you that. People are going to be annoyed at the election and at ASUCD if we have a re-election. I guarantee you that. We had one of the highest voter turnouts ever, and we're complaining about it. I mean, I know it was a small margin. However, like Justin said, it was unfair for all parties involved. But it wasn't even that unfair to begin with, because if you wanted to vote, then you could have voted. Who here did not get to vote who wanted to vote in the ASUCD election? Anybody?
Right here.
Okay, because honestly, like, I'm sorry. Like, in my opinion, if you truly wanted to vote, I woke up the first day of voting and I voted. I don't understand how this small window created such a big controversy. More people than ever gave their voice on this matter, and I don't see why we should try this again and put this candidates and the student population through this again.
During the ASUCD meeting right after the election results, the claims of an unfair election were discussed. After a comparison to third world elections was made, the debate turned from coming to an election conclusion to a racially tense debate among students and among the senators.
Because if you look at third world countries, oppression starts with silence. Look at the democratic principles in this country. They're built on freedom, on a voice. And we're taking that away in a college?
What evidence is there that says that it was an act of God, out of anyone's control, that this server went down? We are a tier 1 research institution, and that's unacceptable to me.
And I think it's a little patronizing to suggest that it is solely a partisan issue, that students would be so upset about their candidate losing that they would demand a re-election. That's not what's going on.
So I think it just sets horrible precedent if we come here tonight and we confirm 6 senators, we go next week, we confirm vice president and the president, and still all of this is worked out. So I just wanted to end the minutes very clearly that president of the Associated Student Body completely disagrees with that.
Ultimately, the canned rhetoric and fallacious arguments were disregarded, and the 6 newly elected senators were sworn in.
I just think that it's like as many people are upset right now, further people will be more people will be upset should there be a re-election. And I think a lot more people will be disconnected from ASUCD if there was a re-election.
According to ASUCD bylaws, the new president and vice president will be sworn in the last ASUCD meeting of the quarter. Stay tuned for more ASUCD information. This is Ignacio Torres reporting from the Aggie TV studios.